Hey guys, quick heads up before I start the video. The link down below takes you to my Patreon, where you can download the project files for this video. Also gain access to my premium tutorials and in-depth courses where we build games together from start to finish. Check out my Patreon below, gain direct access to years of experience so that you can start working on your dream game tomorrow. Hello everybody and welcome back to a new episode of my multiplayer Bean Battle Royale tutorial series. So in the last episode, we set up the loot spawner blueprint, and then we have this volume over here, and it would be responsible for spawning our loot boxes all over the map randomly, and then the loot boxes would also be aligned to the angles of the landscape, so everything would be fine. And in this video, we are going to be working on the player actually being able to interact and open the loot boxes. But before we do that, I quickly want to change something about this loot spawner here. So if we head over to our actors volume, then go to BP lootbox spawner and open this guy up, then we see here in the event graph that we added a +1 here. Well, I did that, but that's not necessary. So we're going to remove it here and just clean it up. So I also set this in the last video with a little comment during the editing. I basically already said you don't have to do the +1. And then what I also want to do is if we open up the spawn loot function, then here we see the line traces that we start to fire. So I quickly want to draw one for duration here and then show you guys something that somebody pointed out to me. So if we now hit simulate, we see that these are all the line traces where the loot boxes basically spawn. And then they do align themselves perfectly to the world and stuff. But what we do see is that each time that we hit play, and yes, it is randomized, each time we see that they are in the center. So somebody very usefully pointed out that that is because we basically have this function here, which is the random point in bounding box function. And then we see that it asks us for a half size. So I thought we basically had to divide the scale of the bounding box here. So if we take a look at the bounding box, we see the box extent. I thought we had to divide that because that's what it asks for. But it turns out that we don't need to do that. So we can actually remove this code. And then if we right click here on the floats, and then we can click on recombine the structure pin, then we can basically directly hook this up in here. And then if we go ahead, hit compile, save and test, then we see that we now actually have them spawning at the correct places all over the volume. So however big our volume is now actually where we randomly start to spawn the line trace and not just in the center of the map. So now that we know that, we can then go back here and then we can turn off the duration here again. So let's just turn that off so that we don't see the debugging anymore. And then one more optimization that I quickly want to do is that, well, first of all, this is a lot of loot. So let's put this to something like 15 to 25, something like that. And then also what we want is that we see that this actor is hanging here inside of the world. Well, by default actors tick, so you can go up to class defaults and turn off the tick here. If you do not use tick in the actor, that's better performance. But even better performance is if we were to just completely remove this actor once it's done its job. So basically back inside of the graph here on the server, after we're completely done spawning 50 loot boxes, we just off of the true here want to type in destroy actor so that this actor will no longer unnecessarily exist inside of our world. All right, so now that we set that up, then I quickly want to take you guys through what we're going to be building here. We also still have the killing volume from the last video. We can destroy that as well. So if we are to have a loot box here, then what we want is that, let's play with one player. Then what we want is that the player basically should have a crosshair in the middle of the screen. And then the player can walk up to any type of item and they should see some kind of widget hovering over this item that would say something along the lines of press E to interact. So before we start opening the loot crate and actually working on the actual items spawning out of the loot crate so we can pick them up, equip them and start shooting, we just need to work on some logics that we can actually look at things inside of our world and then have the opportunity to interact with them. So that's what we're going to be setting up for this video. And let's go ahead and get right started. So first of all, we now know that we need somewhat of a crosshair. That would be nice. Now, obviously, this is going to be a shooter game, so you typically have an actual crosshair and not just something like a dot. But for the purpose of this video, we're simply going to go to our game widgets here, and then we find ourselves our HUD. And then what we're going to do for now is that we're simply going to drag in an image, and we're going to set the image to the middle here. So hold Control, left click, then do it again with Shift, left click. And you see that's nice and in the middle. And then what we're going to do is we're simply going to set the size here to 4 by 4. And then we're going to quickly hit play to judge it. Yeah, so there we go. So we're going to use this little dot in the middle of our screen as our crosshair with which we want to start interacting. So first of all, how are we going to be interacting and how does that work? Well, you can set that up in a lot of ways, as with many things in our engine. So you could, for example, what you see a lot of guys do is they got some kind of a volume around something. Then when you're inside of the volume, you basically have the opportunity to interact with the item that you're overlapping with. So that would look something like if we open up our loot crate here, then they would basically here in the viewport, they would add something like a collision is what you typically see most people do. So they would have a collision and then you see that they scale up that collision just like that. And then they simply have some basic logic, right? So here it's hard to see here. Let's put it on the green actually, so that we can have a better look at it. So they would have these circles around the actors here. And then if the player is within the circle, the player can then interact with it. And the player would get a widget that says press E to interact. Well, I think that's a bit of a lame way to do it, not to offend anybody. But for example, when we start putting two crates close together, and since our crates do randomly spawn from the air, then we can have issues here with these volumes overlapping each other, and then that's all tricky stuff. Besides that, these volumes are collision volumes that have overlapping events. They run on tick, and if we're talking about 50 loot crates up there in our battle royale, then this is not really the type of stuff that I want to see in the game here. So what we're going to be doing is that we're going to be basically judging whether or not we can interact with something based on where the player is looking at. So we're essentially going to shoot a line trace from the camera of the player towards any type of object to see if it is an interactable object. So first of all, we're going to remove this unnecessary sphere that we added here again, and then we're just going to be setting this up. So if we head over to our core folder and then we see core character, then close everything except for the event graph here. And then what we're going to do is that we're going to need to get the event tick. So here we go. Oh, and we see that we already used the event tick over here if we type that in. So what is this? This is whether or not we want to parachute. So we're going to now select all this logic and collapse this to a function. And let's just call it parachute logic. There we go. So that's that. And then what we want to do is that here we want to have our line tracing logic to detect if we want to interact with something. So here under functions, we're going to click on the plus and we're simply going to call this interaction trace. Let's call it something like that. And this interaction trace, we want to do it every tick. You could also run it on timers, do it every 0.1 second, but when it comes to something like interacting, imagine you're running around very quickly, right, in your game, and there's a grenade laying on your floor or health pack that you desperately need. Then in those types of scenarios, you do not want any type of a delay occurring, and that is why we are going to execute this logic on tick. I know that a lot of people are very scared and careful with tick. That is of good reason. You do not need to overuse it for very complex logic or calculations. But what we're going to be doing here is not that hard on Unreal Engine. Do keep in mind, of course, your entire game is actually ticking. I mean, every material that you see, everything that you see is essentially ticking. Your character movement component, your animation blueprint, all these things happen on tick. So you don't have to be too scared of it. To give you guys somewhat of an insight, we got our own multiplayer game called Center, where we can easily have up to 16 players in a lobby with 120 FPS and a lot of replicated actors. And we got a lot of tick there as well. And we still run 120 FPS. So then what we're going to do is that we're going to be opening up this line trace here, and we're going to be executing this line trace on the owning client only. So as we know, the characters exist on the server and on the clients, and we are going to say that it is fine if it is the client that is basically doing this line tracing logic, so that we keep it away from the server, so that every computer and every connected client can basically execute this type of tick logic on their own, and that we don't overload the server with this type of logic. So the first thing that we're going to type here is get player camera manager. and then we get this camera manager here. Now, what is this camera manager? So if we basically take a look at the player controller class in Unreal and then the viewport, then we see that the viewport has a camera here. And that camera is essentially responsible for your eyes in the world. So whenever you also see it here, if you click on class defaults, player camera settings, so player camera manager class basically, and this is all installed inside of this player controller. And then whenever you possess a character, how come that you can see through the camera that is set up in a character? Well, if you select that camera and then scroll down, then we see here that this camera auto activates, and then we also automatically become this camera when we start to possess this actor basically. So what is the player camera manager? It is just basically the camera that we currently use. So now that we got this one in the scene here, then we're simply going to type here is locally controlled. And here we go. We're going to branch off of this. And there we go. So this way we ensure that only every client and the server also does it for themselves. Then next up, we're going to type in line trace by channel, and not a multi-line trace by channel. Line trace by channel, this one, and then we're going to hook it up to the true. So what does this line trace ask for? It asks us for a start and a finish. So for the start, we're simply going to say, okay, that is going to be the get actor location of our camera manager, so wherever our camera is in the world. And then for the end here, we're going to say that we are going to get the forward vector of our camera actor, so basically the direction that we're looking at, and then we're going to multiply it. So if we then do a times here and then multiply, then we're going to right click here and convert it to a float with single precision is fine. And then we want to multiply it by the length of our line trace for interaction. So however we want to be able to interact, however long we want to be able to interact is what we need to type in here. So if we type in 500, that is equal to 5 meters, because 100 Unreal Engine units is essentially 1 meter. So when it comes to third person interaction, we also have to keep in mind that if we take a look at our character here, that we already have this spring arm length, and then we still want to go beyond this length even till a point like over here, where we would then actually be hitting objects. So this would need to be something like 10 meters long essentially. So we're going to promote this to a variable. Here we go. And then we're simply going to call this line trace, or let's call it interaction length. Now, the reason that this is easier to promote to a variable is because what you can imagine is when you start zooming in, so basically we are behind the character like this, we start zooming in over our shoulder, then the camera might come closer. And then if the camera comes closer, that does not mean that we want our interaction trace to become longer. So if we promote this to a variable, we can then basically later on down the line have an easy way to code how long our interaction length is dynamically based on the situation. So if we zoom in, it needs to be shorter. Okay, then we drag out of this actor location and do a simple plus, and then we're gonna basically just plus the camera actor location plus our length that we calculated forwards, and this is going to go into the end. Then we can have a quick look at what this does. So if we do here debug and then duration, and then let's check what we set our default value here to. So 5 meters, let's change that to something like 1000 then for 10 meters. Then we can go ahead and hit play. And there we go. So now we see these red lines here, and this is basically all of those interaction traces. So how far does the line go? Yeah, that's a pretty decent length, but we'll get a better feel for if this is a decent length when we start interacting with this box here. So next up, we're going to go back here. We're going to turn off the duration again for the debugging. And then we're going to say, well, first of all, we only want to be interacting if we have a valid hit. So if we are looking into the sky, we don't want to do anything. And if we have a valid hit, we want to get our hit result. Because here we can then basically see what the actor is that we hit. And towards this actor, we want to start basically communicating the fact that we want to interact with it. So before we go any further here, we're now going to have to make a couple of things. So one of those things is an interface, which is going to be our interaction interface. So any actor in the world that we want our player to be able to interact with needs to implement this interface. So if we go here to interfaces, we can right click, go to blueprints, BP interface. And then we're going to call this BPI, blueprint interface underscore interaction. There we go. We're going to open it up. And then the first function, we're going to name it something along the lines of interact. Oh, interact. So this one is going to be actually responsible for handling our interact. Okay, so that's our interact function. And then the next function is going to be our, let's call it set focused function. Now we do want to put these guys both in a category. So we call it interaction, and then select this one as well. Put that in the interaction category as well. And there we go. So now if we hit compile and save, then we're going to find our Lootcrate blueprint, which is located inside of our actors folder, this one. And then we're going to click on class settings, and then under interfaces, we're going to type in BPI interaction. And then we see that our interaction interface gets added here, and then we get the corresponding events. So these events, we basically want to get them into the world. So we're going to double click here and double click here. And there we go. Okay, so whenever the player interacts with it, we want to actually have the crate check if it is already open or not. And if it is not, then we want it to open. And for the focus, we basically want to do that if the player is shooting the line traces at this actor, then we want to display some kind of an interaction widget above the actor that displays press E to interact. So first of all, we're going to quickly set up that widget right now. So if we go to our widget folder, game widgets, then let's go ahead and just right click here, widget blueprint, user widget, and call this something like WB interaction feedback. We're just going to make this one rough. So we're going to open it up, drag in a border, click here, desired on screen, zoom in, and then we're going to simply, let's do some text in here. We're going to right click, wrap the text with, let's say, a vertical box. And then let's make the border a different color. So we're actually going to make it fully black. And then the A, we're going to put it to something like 0.6 to have it be transparent. Now this font is very big, so we can change it to something like 16. And then we want this vertical box to have some padding all the way around. So let's do 12 padding all the way around. So this text should say something like an item name. And then we also want some text in here that displays what we need to press. So this bottom text we can, or actually, let's make this top text. We're going to make it say E to interact, something like that, right? And then this should be way smaller. So this could be something like 12 and then light. And then this text here is going to display the name. So we're going to call this name underscore text and promote it to variable. And here we're simply going to call it something like assault rifle. So let's have it be something like that. Hit compile and save. And then we are going to go into the graph. Now off of our event construct, we're going to drag in our name. We're going to drag out and say set text, hook this guy up. Then we're going to promote this to a variable, which we can call item name. And yeah, it should be something like that. And this item name, we want to be able to basically communicate to it. So we don't want to do that on event construct. We actually want to make a function that we call something like a setup function. So if we right click here, type in custom event, then let's call this update widget. And instead of promoting this to a variable, we're actually just going to run it through this event. I'm thinking that's easier. It will be clear in a little bit why this is easier, but let's just make this say feedback text. So we want the feedback text to go in here, and that's what we want to display here. So then we hit compile, save, and there we go. Okay, so now that we got that widget, we want it to appear above this box here. So if we find our loot crate again, go to the viewport, then what we can do is we can select the bottom, click on add, and then type in widget, and then we get our widget here. Then if we drag the widget above here, then we see on the right, we got a couple of settings. So the first setting here should be the widget class, which is going to be our interaction widget. So interaction feedback. And then we see that this happens here, and that here is our crazy looking widget. So yeah, you could put it in world. That makes the widget actually 3D. But what we want to do here is we want to have it be on screen. And then we also want to draw it at the desired size. So if we do that, then the widget will simply display the way that it would be on the screen actually. So right now, if we click play, then there we go. So yeah, now we see our own little widget here above the box, and it also automatically rotates towards the player. So this is great. But we also see all of those other loot boxes and all those widgets over there. So we're going to have to basically change something, and we're going to do that right now. So on the loot crate here, with the widget selected, what we're going to do is that we're going to set the visibility to default to not be visible. So if we scroll down here, we see visible, and we're simply going to turn it off. And there we go. Hit compile, save, and that's it. Okay, so then what do we want to do? Well, we want to say that if we put the focus on it, we basically want to make the widget visible. So very simple, we're going to drag this widget in here. We're going to drag out of it, type in set visibility. And then right here, we're going to hook this up. So we're going to set it to true. Whenever we get the focus event, we're going to set the visibility to true. And then we're going to use a retriggerable delay of a very short amount. So let's make it 0.1. And after the retriggerable delay, we're going to turn the visibility of the widget off again. And that's basically our focusing logic here. So what does this mean? Every tick, this basically comes towards the actor. So the actor, every tick is like, okay, I see you, I see you, I see you, I see you. I display, I display, I display. And then since this is a retriggerable delay, we know that retriggerable delays only execute whenever they have been completed. So if we intercept the retriggerable delay every time before it gets completed, then we basically keep the widget visible. Now, if we look away from this actor for longer than the 0.1 seconds, then basically we can set our widget to invisible again, because that means we haven't received a focus event in a while. Well, in 0.1 seconds to be exact. Okay, so that's it for this. But then what we did see is that we had the opportunity to set the actual text inside of the widget. So we're going to do that as well. So if we right click here somewhere in the graph and get a little begin play event, then on begin play, we basically want to set up this widget so that it displays the correct name inside of it. So we're going to make a quick little function here. Let's call it something like setup interaction widget. And then the logic here is we're going to drag in the widget, typing get widget. Then off of here, we're going to cast to our interaction feedback widget. And then we made that event that we saw earlier, which we called update widget. And then we want to update it with the name of this item. So in here, we would update this and call this something like item name. And there we go. And then this item name, in this case, in this case, the item name is always loot box, because this is the loot box that we're interacting with. So here we actually don't have to promote this to a variable, and we can simply say loot box or loot crate, whatever you want to call it. Hit compile, save. Make sure that on the begin play, we actually set this guy up. And there we go. So now whenever the widget becomes visible, we actually know that we can show it here. So if you quickly debug it here, then we can play, and then we see that it now says Loot Crate. Check out Cactus Center right now on Steam in Early Access. It's a very fun multiplayer video game, cheaper than a Starbucks coffee. So if you want to have a good time with your friends or strangers, click that link down below, and I appreciate every single one of you, and enjoy the rest of the video. Bye! Okay, then we're going to go back into our character, and then we need to basically finish the logic here. So first of all, we now see that we do the traces for the visibility channel. So that means anything that is visible will get hit by our trace and will be returned. And that is not what we need. So we need that only items of a certain collision channel are going to be hit by our interaction trace. So what we're going to do is we're going to click here on edit, go to project settings, and then on the left here we will find collision, and then we see trace channels over here. So underneath trace channels, we're going to click on new channel, and we're going to call this interaction. And by default, we want it to be set to block. And then if we hit accept, and there we go. So now we have a new channel, and with that channel added, we can then go back here, and then we can switch this out to that new channel. If you do not see it like me right now, then you quickly need to restart your editor. So that's what I'm gonna do. Close it and restart it. Okay, then we open up our level again. And there we go. So now if we click this actor and we quickly want to find it, we can do Control B to find it inside of our content browser. Then we can open this guy up again. Then we can also find our character again over here. And here we go. So we're back inside of the interaction trace function here. And now if we click on the trace channel, we will see interaction here as the trace channel. So now that this is set to interaction, then if we quickly take a look here at our loot crate and click on the whatever item we want the item to be to interact with. So let's say this bottom half here. Then we can take a look at its collision presets here, and we see that the interaction for this guy is set to block. Okay, so now we know that we basically only do traces for the interaction channel trace. So then if we take a look at our actors, you need to ensure that your actors that you want to be interactable are at least set to block for the interaction trace channel. So since we set in the project settings that the interaction channel is set to block by default, we see that that is blocked. So because that's blocked, it's going to return a true here whenever we hit it. Okay, so next up, out of the hit actor, the first thing we're going to do is to see if does this actor actually implement our interaction interface. So we type in PPI interaction. Then whenever we start hitting actors, we want to know if we are actually interacting with actors that do have this interface. Now, in the case that that's true, like this, then we can say that we can store a little reference of the actor that we hit here. So if we drag off of the hit actor, then we're going to promote this to a variable and we're going to call this the interacting actor. So interaction actor. And then over here, we're going to go off of the true. So when we hit an actor that implements our interaction interface, we save a little reference to it. And that's going to be used for when we press E while looking at it, that we can actually use this reference to send the interface event towards this actor that we actually interact with it. So first of all, here we're going to basically save it as a copy. And then in the case that it does not implement it, then we're going to say, okay, if our interaction actor is valid, so we're going to right click and click on convert to validated get. If our interaction actor is valid, that means that we still have a reference from the old guy that we hit that did implement this interface. Then we're going to say if we now see that we're not hitting somebody with the interaction interface anymore, then we're going to say if this is still set to the old guy, so if it is valid, then we're simply going to invalidate it. So if it is valid, we're going to set it to nothing. So we're just going to simply drag it in here, click set, and then not hook up anything over here. So here we store a reference. If we look at the loot crate, if we look away from the loot crate, that reference gets deleted. And then if we basically have a hit on an actor that has the interaction interface, then we want to basically say that we want to send our set focused interface event towards that actor. So off of here, we're going to type in set focused, and then we see this message from our interaction interface. And this is going to go towards this actor over here. And then we hit compile and save. Okay, so now let's give this a quick little test. So we have our actor here. We're going to hit play. And then we see that we do not see the widget for this crate. Then if I look at it, we see E to loot, E to loot, E to loot. So that's very nice. So now we can basically, as the player, interact with this little crate here. And then we can put a second crate to validate it. And we can also test it with 2 players. So let's put something like 3 crates like this. Then we're going to go here, 2 players, listen server, and hit play. Okay, so here again, so we got our client on the left here. Client can then look at something, and then he individually sees that he can interact with these crates whenever he looks at it with the crosshair. And then the server can do the same. And we don't see each other looking at these crates, so we don't see each other's widgets. So the server can look at this one, and then the client can simply look at this one, or they can look at the same one at the same time. And everything works independently for their own local player character. So there we go, guys. That's basically how we can have our interaction trace. And then next up would be that we actually start interacting with the actual loot crate. So to do that, we're going to go back into our loot crate here. And then we're going to put this all down a little bit. So here we have our interaction event. So whenever we interact with this guy, we want to do something. So whatever we want to do, first of all, we're going to have to code the input for it. So if we go up to edit, project settings, Then we go to input, action mappings, and then we're going to click on new input and call this interact. And we're going to be assigning it to E. So if we click here, we can then assign the E. There we go. Then back inside of the character, we're now going to type in interact. And then we want our, let's see here, we want our here action event interact. There we go. So what do we want to do upon interact? Well, essentially we need to interact on the server. So we cannot directly call server events that exist on this character here because our character does not have something called ownership over this character here. But we can directly interact if we first from our offline character go to our server-side character and then have our server-side character interact with the server side of the loot crate. So basically, what do I mean by that? We know that on tick, we have the local player controller executing this tick logic, right? So right now, if I were to drag in this interaction actor reference, drag off of here and type in interact from our interface here, then this would basically just come true on the offline version of the crate here. So if I am to do print string, then we just see hello. So now if I got my two characters here, and then we're gonna go over to the crates, then we have our client on the left, our server guy on the right here. So what happens if the server now looks at this crate and presses E? Then we see that the server simply prints one hello. And then here, if this guy walks up to the crate and then press E, we see that just the client says hello. So right now, if we wanted to actually open this lid here, that needs to happen on the server. But like I said, the client does not have ownership over this actor. So because of that, we're first going to have to go from our character to the server-side version of our character and have the server-side version of our character interacting with this event over here. So basically what that looks like is if we do right click in the character, type in custom event, SR interact, and then the SR stands for server, then we can run this on the server reliably. And then if we disconnect this, then here we can do SR interact, and there we go. And then this is basically how we want to do it. And then this variable over here is going to go into here. So this goes into here, and then this one goes into here. So the local version sends that reference of the actor to the server, and we have the server-side version of our character interacting with this loot crate. So now let's see again what happens whenever we actually press E and interact here. So let's get over to the loot crates. Okay. So here we go. So now if our server here on the right, first of all, presses E, we see server hello. And then if the client now presses E, we also see server hello. And that's great. So that's exactly what we want to happen. Because now that we are on the server here, so we go from local to server, we are still on the server, and we saw that only the server now printed hello, then we can in this case now have the server do interesting stuff, such as multicasting that this lid is actually going to be opening, right? Or any other events. So we got cosmetic events and we got actual gameplay related events, and now the server can authoritatively handle all of this logic. So we're going to remove the print string here, and then we're now going to basically create that the event so that this actor can actually open up. So if we right click here, we're going to type in custom event, and we're going to call this open crate. So there we go. Then we're going to right click and do a timeline, and this is called create opening _ time line. So we quickly need to make the cosmetic event so that the lid can actually go open. So the lid, we see that it is at a 0x, and the x is the one that opens it. So we want it to go from 0 to, let's say, 130x. So if we open up our timeline, click on track, add a flow track, call this something like lid rotation. Then we hold shift and click. We can also right click and type and click here on add key, but shift click is easier. So first of all, this first one, we're going to put it at 0 seconds. And then this last one, we're going to put it at, let's do 0.5 seconds. And then the length here of the entire timeline is going to be put to 0.5 seconds. And then we know that we want to move it from 0 rotation to at 0.5 seconds to, what did we say, minus 140 or 30. So minus 130. If we click these icons, then we see the entire line here. Then we can select a line, right click and put it to auto to make it open a bit more naturally. And there we go. So whenever we do this, we want to play this from the start. And then basically what that does is that we grab the lid. We want to set the rotation, the relative rotation of the lid. And we want to set the X relative rotation. So this one goes into the X. And there we go. And this is it. Okay, so now that we got this event ready, this the event responsible for opening lid, then we need to actually code that the lid is opening. So I said we are on the server here, we can now do multicast, but then keep in mind if there would be players that would connect later on in the session, they would have missed the multicast event and then they would see the box basically still being closed even though it was opened. So we are going to use something called a rep notify, which if even a player that connects later would connect, then they would basically still get the value of the rep notify that would basically give them the correct state that this loot crate is resorting in. And then we would have the rep notify calling this event here, so that even if you connect later to the session, you would still see the correct version of whether or not the crate is open or closed. So we're gonna click here on variables and type in opened question mark. We're gonna set this variable to rep notify, and that's it. So on the event interact, we're going to drag this in, and then we're going to say if opened is false, we're going to set opened to true. Pretty simple logic. And then if we open this up, then in here, we are going to call this event, which actually physically opens the crate. So in here, and keep in mind, rep notify, of course, on the server and all clients. So in here, we're then going to type in open crate, and that's this. And then hit compile save, and there we go. So now if we test this with 2 players, then actually I'm going to close it. First we need to click on class defaults. Yeah, so you need to make sure that your actor is replicating, of course. So it is. So now if we test this, then we have the client on the left, server on the right. Let's go ahead and walk up to these crates of ours. Here we go. And here we go. So let's have the server opening this crate. So the server looks at it, presses E, and there we go. It opens up. And then once it is opened and I keep pressing E, it doesn't do anything anymore because these crates are not like close open crates. It's loot crates. So once it has been looted, it should stay open. And then the server can look at this crate, press E, open it, and there we go. And even if players would connect later on, then we would still see the crate in the correct state. So now the last piece here is that you guys might want to, of course, add something like a cosmetic sound effect, right? So if we open up this crate, you might want it to make a sound. So in that case, you would not install something like that inside of your rep notify. Now, why not? Well, imagine that you got all these crates and the player connects 10 minutes later to the session, would then basically get into the relevancy area of the crate, then would see the crate opening. Then that player would hear all the sounds of the crates opening. And that's not really what we want. So basically, the cosmetic events, such as sounds, are good to handle on the multicast. So if we do right click, custom event, then we do MC cosmetic opening, and then we're gonna click here, multicast reliable, and we're gonna call that straight after here. So if we open the crate for the first time, we're gonna call the MC cosmetic opening event, and this one will actually happen once. And if you did miss it, if you connect later to the session, then you simply just missed it and you're not gonna see it ever again. So here you could do something like play sound at the location. You would then do the get actor location, plug that in here, and then you would play some kind of a sound here. Well, I don't have a sound here, but this is basically what that would look like. So I'm going to disconnect this, and then you guys understand how you can set something like that up. So handle cosmetic events. You could also, for example, say if the loot crate opens, it shoots a little particle. You don't want that to happen whenever somebody connects later and sees all these crates, that all of that happens. So there we go. Then next up, if we take a look at the class default settings, we see the relevancy here, which is 150 meters. So if the client is outside of the relevancy, it's not going to see updates happening. So let's have a quick look at that, but then we're going to decrease this value a little bit. So I'm just going to drag it to some kind of a number, not sure how big this is, and hit play. And then put this here and here. Okay, so there is our boxes here, and we're going to have the client run away, but we do want to have the client still be able to see the boxes. So I hope that this is already far enough, and here we go. So now the server is going to basically walk up to the box, and then we're going to press E. Okay, so the client still sees the box opening, so now we're going to get the client even further away. We need to somehow get him out of the relevancy area. So here we go. So the client, yeah. Okay, so we're gonna have to zoom in the video editing, but now the server is gonna open this crate, and there you go. So the client does not see the server opening the crate now, because the client is not relevant to the replicated actor anymore. So the client is too far away from the actor for it to get the data, because we simply say if you're too far away, it's not relevant to you. So when working in a battle royale, you need to keep these things in mind, because people got snipers and you want them to see at great distances. So some things might always be relevant inside of battle royales. And then when the client walks up to it, you'll see that the rep notify fires up, and there we saw it. We saw the crate opening. So then when the client actually gets close enough, we see that the client does sync with the rep notify and sees the correct state of this actor. And servers here, they do not have relevancy, so they do not have culling distance. So they would see this happening at all the distances. So here we can open this guy up as well. And if you want to visualize this, what I'm talking about right now, we can then click here on add and type in collision. Let's do a sphere collision. And then what we can do on begin play here, or actually on event construct, is if we drag in the sphere, we can then say set radius, set sphere radius. And then if we type in get net cull distance squared, then we can basically square this squared and plug that in here. So now if we then hit compile and save, then we see these balls here. So this is now the cull distance, and that's why we had to stand all the way over here. So if we go to the loot crate and then click here, then we can change the cull distance to something much lower. And then here you can now visualize how big the culling distance is. So if we were to make it even smaller, something like, I don't know, this, then we got a very short culling distance. So now if we hit play, then we see here that, well, we got the server, and then the client is probably outside of that sphere already. So right now, if the server is to open this box, then basically, oh, so the loot crate has collision now here, this sphere. So make sure that we put the sphere to no collision actually, because our line trace is now interacting with that. And then we also want to make it not hidden in the game. And then let's test again. So there we go. So now we can have the server running up to our little crate here, to this one. And then our client is outside of the cull distance. So right now, even if it's if the server opens it, the client doesn't see anything happening. And then if the client runs in here, it gets the update. And then once the client is inside of the sphere, if the server then opens it, then we do see everything happening. And then, like I said, the server is always relevant, so we can also visualize that. If we step out of here, then we're clearly outside of the cull distance. And then if the client opens it, then we see that the server still sees it, even though he is outside of the relevancy area, because it does not apply to the server. Okay, let's go ahead, remove this sphere then. Here we go, and there we go. Okay guys, that's it for this video, because this is already a pretty long video. I hope you guys enjoyed it. If you did, then also be sure to check it out on the Patreon, where you can mess with the full project yourself. In the next video, we're going to be working on actually spawning the loot items that we can then interact with. So these things, they also go on the angles of the landscape, of course. So we're going to be spawning some items that will actually just glide down. If they spawn here on the slope, they'll just be falling down the slope as well. With physics, yeah. And then we basically want to have those actors interactable. So these crates with random chances will shoot out some pickup items, and then the clients can interact, and the server as well, with the pickup items. And then very shortly from now, once you have the ability to pick these items up, you can then use them and start shooting, and this will turn into a very cool battle royale. I think that we need around 5 or 6 more parts to finish the series right now. So okay guys, that's it for this video. I hope you enjoyed it. If you did, please give it a like and subscribe, and then I'll see you guys in the next one. Bye!